Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Troopers. There is considerably fewer faces than yesterday. I'm tempted not to attribute this to bad quality of talks, so people have left. I'm tempted to attribute this to the fun some of you, or those who are not here, had last night. Who of you was in the run? We will comment on this later on in more detail, but just to let you know, it was 39 people who made it up the hills, which is this induced a bit of a delay when getting started, which I right immediately hand over to Rodrigo. Rodrigo has been at Troopers since the very first edition. Actually, there's two guys who have been at Troopers since the very first edition, Mr. Sergei Bratus and Rodrigo. This guy has a certain role. This guy will keynote. Rodrigo.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, great. Good morning. So, as Ino pointed out, 9 years in Troopers already, and I'm really glad that that's the first time something is late in Germany, and it's not because of me. So, thank you for that. Thank you for everybody who was running. So we are here to discuss a little bit about hacking community and how research is performed and the importance of hackers in the world and the difference between what is a hacker work and what is security professionals doing security research professionally. The intention of this is basically to try to bring some new ideas, some new visions, and some discussions to the community. I want to point out and start saying about this sentence, in my opinion, actually really illustrates one of the main problems we have, not only on the security community, but actually in the world in general. But it basically clarifies why usually people who don't know much are the ones that want to talk a lot, and the people that actually have all the knowledge are the ones that are not actually being heard. So what I will try to do in this talk is basically prize others, instead of trying to bring any ideas that are specifically mine. Before we start, I just want to make clear that even though I work for Intel, I'm not here representing Intel. And what I do for Intel is the security of the CPUs. I have nothing to do with the McAfee products, okay? So if any I also thought it was really fun, the video from John McAfee, by the way. But most importantly, as a personal disclaimer, I want to make clear that I don't represent in the hacking community. I don't think anybody does, okay? And I don't think anybody can represent the hacking community even in a given location. The community is huge. There is a lot going on, a lot of people contributing, a lot of people doing amazing work. And nobody can speak for them. Also, whatever anyone speaks about, it will be their views on what is the community, right? Based on their own experiences. So everything that I will present here is basically based on this very small fraction of what I know about the hacking community. It can be completely wrong. It can be completely different than the other communities around the world. And I hope that I managed to gather enough information to really represent a lot, but I can't guarantee that, and I don't expect to be speaking for anybody. One thing that I want to do for this talk, as I said, I want to bring ideas from people much smarter than me and try to connect into the problems in security. And since computer security itself is something quite new, I look into other problems that are involve logic, involve mental challenges, are very complicated, and had a lot of smart people looking into them. And chess was actually one of the good points that I could find to try to do this matching. In chess, we had amazing grandmasters along the years. It is an area that is evolving. You can see that nowadays, kids are becoming grandmasters when they are 12 years old. Some of them actually even earlier than that. And this is an area that is being evolving, and people are applying logic there. So I know that like many grandmasters of chess had like amazing contributions to the science of logic. So I try to basically bring those sayings and try to connect it back to computer security. And I will start with Korchnoi. He basically once said that no chess grandmaster is normal. They only differ in the extent of their madness. So I want to say that no hacker is really normal, okay? And but what is really normal, right? To be honest, we're talking about like people that want to exercise creativity and really like freedom. They like to share, but not necessarily with you or with me, right? They share with their friends or not, or maybe they just keep to themselves. It is an interesting area because like many times people say, no, if you are a hacker, you must share. Why is that? Right? There is no such a definition. There is no such one personality. People are different, and actually hackers are especially different. So that's how I want to basically start. And the objective really for the talk is basically because the world changed, right? There is a lot of new people in the world, and the world is growing, and technology is consuming everything, and everything is connected nowadays. I bet some of these projectors are like with wireless interface. I bet like our microphone is somehow connected to the internet as well. So with those changes brings lots of new challenges. And the security community is basically trying to merge with the hacking community. And many times, people actually mix the two, right? You can be a great security researcher and not be a hacker, and you can be a great hacker and not be a security researcher. And this is one of the things that I will try to discuss here. And I will try to prize the work of like great hackers that really changing the world. And Sergey Bratos will be one of those that will get prized. But why we are here, right? Like if we look into the numbers in security, and I bet like everyone here is aware of those, like the numbers like are crazy, right? So for example, AV Test published some numbers. They say that there are like 300 million malware samples in the world. That's crazy. That's like a lot of people like writing malware, or there is something completely wrong on the way that we're collecting numbers. I would say it's the second, but who knows, right? But actually, one piece of information that actually got completely lost on the amount of garbage that nowadays are running on the internet was basically a tweet by Mudge. And as you guys know, Mudge was like a very famous hacker that ended up like leading the DARPA program in the US government. And he actually tweeted, and in his tweet, he even mentioned that that's like public numbers by the DoD. And basically the numbers like that he tweeted says that 1/3 of all the government systems vulnerabilities, like so all the vulnerabilities found in the government systems in the US, 1/3 were basically caused by security software. So the software that was supposed to be there to protect that infrastructure was responsible for 1/3 of the vulnerabilities that infrastructure had. And that's actually tell us something, but I will try not to think that security is not working, but maybe that the quality of the security software is not working, or maybe they're trying to develop so quickly that they actually injecting new vulnerabilities on the systems. I don't know what we can actually get from that, but this is a statistic that basically everybody ignored, and I don't know why, because to me it tells a lot, and we need to really reflect on this. And to start the conversation, I want to say as well that every time that someone gives you a tip, remember that that tip or that idea or that recommendation, it's basically based on the history of that person giving it, right? So whatever I say, remember that like it might apply for me, it might have worked for me, but not necessarily apply to all of you. So let's try to always put context in whatever information we get and try to understand that context. That would work especially well when you're getting like marketing information from like security experts, okay? Another thing is like I always tell people, try to be honest on what you're doing with yourself, right? I see many security researchers that really want to participate on the hacking community, and then in the end, that's one of the reasons creating confusion. You can be an excellent security researcher without having anything to do with what is called the hacker community, and vice versa, okay? But know exactly what you really want, what is your ideas, why you're publishing something, and that will be really interesting. I will connect a little bit more on those ideas as we go through the talk. Another thing that I want to mention is many times we see people talking about like information, right? We receive a lot of information every day, and that's actually partially true. Most of what we receive every day, we should treat as just data. And we need to actually process that data and really try to understand if the information that comes from that makes sense or not. Many times people say, hey, I analyzed this and this is the final information, but they don't include methodology. They don't include really what's happening there. And I think like that's important. If you don't really understand how a given data was produced, you can't call that information, right? You need to be able to analyze and to really consider what are like the underlines on that, what was missed and what was not. So a good example is like the 1/3 vulnerabilities in the government systems. It's really interesting, but can we really count on that or not? Because I don't know, like I don't know the methodology. What did they count? The vulnerabilities that Nessus found? Or they counted like real vulnerabilities that had the exploits? Or what? Like how was the methodology for collecting that data? Okay, so I would be very careful, even more nowadays, to treat everything as correct. In many research that I did, I looked into previous research actually as a base, and that's actually normal, right? We want to evolve the science, so we look into the prior art, and many times there were inconsistencies, right? That if I only counted the fact that that research was completely correct and assumed everything correct from there, the inconsistencies would be propagated and more mistakes would be made. So I think it's really important that we have this idea, this analysis and analytics over whatever we look. And that's one of the things that I always recommend people. And obviously, how deep you do that analysis really depends on how critical is the information for you and your life, right? If someone tells you something about Heidelberg, and they're like you're really interested, and you think that will change your life because, I don't know, you're deciding to move to Heidelberg, go and check that information, right? If they tell you something and you think, wow, that's really cool, but like it's just good to know, then it's fine. You can trust that person, for example, right? So let's always remember to put these analytics. And even though this sounds like very trivial, in normal day, like in the daily day of everyone, I see that's actually not happening. And in the work environment, that's even worse. And many times when people actually apply analysis and you ask like follow-up questions to understand really, hey, how do you know that information about Heidelberg? Did you get it from someone or did you read in a book, for example? Right? Things that make sense to ask. Someone is sharing you a piece of information. Sometimes the people on the other side of the communication, they get upset because they think that you're questioning them, right? But you're not. You're just like trying to understand how that information was produced. Another thing is like, I see a lot of people like basically blogging, posting lots of information, right? And it's interesting because in a world where there is so much information available, how come we still see people making basic mistakes? It's basically because the information is not getting to their heads, right? And the reason is not sometimes like we associate the reason for people not learning with them like not caring or not trying to learn. But honestly, I think there is a flood, an excess of data that everybody is receiving every day. And people don't have the organization to really process that. And without the organization, they end up like reading everything that they receive. And they don't have the time to really incorporate that reading. And in the end, they don't actually absorb any of the data, anything that they're actually getting. So I want to basically explain like how I study, right? And that works for me, and that has worked for me for quite some time. And I actually adapted that from like a grandmaster of chess called Alexander Kotov. So Kotov was never like the world champion, but he was like for many years, for decades, between the 10 best players in the world. He was that guy that in a world championship many times changed the result because he got a draw with the guy who was supposed to be the favorite, and then the guy got out of the championship because of a half a point, right? So he is that guy that changed the history, but like not directly being the champion. But he was always there on the top. So he definitely know a lot about like what is going on in the top process, even though maybe he didn't have the ability to get there in the top. And he wrote a book, and actually there is a sequel for that book called like Think Like a Grandmaster. And in that book, he basically says the difference between a normal chess player and someone that actually gets to be a grandmaster in chess. And it's all about the organization of the thought process on how you look into the game. And when I looked into this book for the first time, when I was reading the book for the first time, it actually connected to me because that basically makes sense on when you're studying anything. And here I want to make a difference between studying and reading. Right? I read like a lot. I definitely read a lot. Lots of papers every day, books every week. And I think like everybody here is the same, right? But reading is not studying, right? We read to be aware of something that is going on, but that's different than really having a deep understanding. For having a deep understanding, we need to study, and that requires organization, right? And that's basically the way that I will do. So imagine that when I get a paper, a new paper, so something in PocketGTFO, for example, that I really want to study and understand. So what I do is like I start reading it, and every topic that I don't know, I will create like a tree. So if I don't know the topic and it's directly related to my understanding of that paper, I will put it on the left of the tree. If I don't know that topic, but it's not related, it's just interesting, it was just a mention to something that might be interesting, I will put it into the right. And before proceeding the reading, I always go left, which means that everything that is essential for the understanding, I will go and I will research as well. So if I study with a paper in PocketGTFO, I will end up in papers in FRAC, and then maybe a paper like in an academic journal, and then finally maybe a computer science book to understand the fundamentals of what was being said. And in the end, yes, you will take like a year for really studying a paper. But it's cool because when you finish, you don't know only the content of that paper. You know everything that is the fundamentals that actually made that paper possible. And that's where you start knowing much more things that you actually don't even understand how you got to know, right? Because you're basically growing all the knowledge regarding that topic, and finally that topic becomes like really trivial to understand, and that's when you finish that paper, and then you go to the items on the right, the interesting ones, but that were not directly connected. So the tree would look like this, for example. You start the paper, so the paper A, you see something like the subject that is essential to understand, B, so you go to B, and then you start like reading on that subject, and if that paper has another thing, you go to C, and everything that is really not of a sense, you just go to put to the right, and you never go to the right until you really finish your path of study. And it's interesting because it looks like, hey, but it makes no sense. It will take like a year for reading a paper. Yeah, maybe. But, well, if you're really studying that paper, you want to make sure that you really understood everything that is there. So that's the only way to do it, in my opinion. So other people might have a different approach, but in general, if you don't focus the study, like you end up like not knowing anything, but having a lot of data in your minds, right? So then people say, okay, that's excellent, right? Once you know what you study, but how do you really prioritize what do you study, right? And then I went to get another grandmaster of chess, like to my help. So Botivnik. Botivnik was like world champion for he was actually the world champion for like decades. And actually he was not only that, he was the guy who actually trained like Karpov, Kasparov, Kramnik, some of the best world chess some of the best chess players in the history. And it's interesting because a guy with that like a history of like being really good, not only teaching but also doing, like he must have something to explain us. And even after like he was the world champion and he had all these famous pupils, like he was said like to listen to basic chess lessons on the radio in Russia. And once someone asked him, hey, you are the world champion. You prepared like the best chess players in history. Why do you listen to basic chess classes in the radio? And basically he said, it's all about the fundamentals. If you don't have a solid foundation, everything else falls. And basically, like when we study, it's like interesting because we kind of arrogant, right? Like I consider myself very arrogant many times, and I need to fight with that because otherwise, what happens is like you always want to see what is highly technical, highly complex, and you start forgetting what is really the basics. And when you start forgetting that, you start making like basic mistakes in very complex things. And that's why nobody catch those mistakes, right? Because they are basic, but they are trying to, like the basic mistakes are appearing in the very complex topics because people don't have the fundamentals. So always emphasize and prioritize the fundamentals. So if you don't know what to go and look, fundamentals first. And look into, like, if we really think about computers, even though I started the talk saying, yeah, the world changed, computers are everywhere, like it's like all connected and all. The base of like how computers work, that didn't change actually for many years. Like Turing model, like of what is computable, started in 36. And that's actually even before digital computers, right? So Chomsky, like language hierarchy work, is from the 50s, which basically is the fundamentals behind the LangSec, right? Which is applying this kind of like research. The TCP/IP is from the 80s. PC architecture is from the 80s. Yes, it's changed a lot, like the core is much more complex than it used to be. But the fundamentals of the architecture, how it works in a sense, that's there since the 80s, right? So I think like everyone had enough time to actually gather those fundamentals and know about them. And then we can apply that into like the more complex problems and go up and up until we're really solving the complex problems. There is also another thing that I also want to get like Botivnik for my help. When it's like, hey, what is the difference between learning and memorizing, right? And Botivnik can say that memorizing the variations of like the openings is actually maybe worse than not knowing them. And it's interesting because, you know, like that's a very common mistake, right? I very often go into conferences and places and I talk to people and they come with a lot of terms. You know, like they know everything, all the symbols, what they mean, all the terminology, all the complexities, lots of details on the terms. And then you ask, okay, what that really means? How is that? Why that works that way? And the person has no idea, right? It's interesting because why he memorized all the terms if we don't really know what they actually mean, right? So it's very dangerous because we create in ourselves a fake understanding of knowledge, right? We believe we know a lot because we talk to people, we throw terms, the people don't know the terms, so wow, we know more than the other guy. And maybe you're talking to someone who is like really good, like has super deep understanding on what he does, and he will not know your terms. So be careful with that. And actually, just like to say that, you know, like some great minds like Botivnik, they think alike, so look into what Einstein said, like also. Never memorize something you can look up in a book. Of course, like nowadays, if you can look up in Google, right? And it's signed and comes from a trusted source. So, how do you make your learning plan, right? And that's actually also interesting because if we need to prioritize fundamentals and we need to make like a learning plan, how do we plan like really the end result, right? Because we need to know that end result. And I will get actually Capablanca. He was like another chess player, Cuban chess player, another world champion. Like this guy was really recognized as like the talent of chess. So since always, actually, since he was very young. And also like in a chess tournament, in chess tournament, it's really funny because some people discuss that chess is not a sport, but chess is a sport, okay? And in a chess tournament, in the past, we had like the grandmasters are playing, and we had like a big chess board on the back. And someone sees the movement in the game and go and plays on the chessboard. Nowadays, of course, you have cameras and it's like streaming to the internet and all, but that's always been there, okay? Like the idea of like other people seeing that game. And the grandmasters during like the main games, they get together in rooms, like a side of the main game, and they discuss that main game. Right? Similar to what we do in conferences, right? Like there is a talk and then people get together, people discuss and all, right? That's very important for evolving, right? Good. So in that like analytics, like imagine that all the grandmasters in the room, they were like for hours looking to the game, right? The game take like 8 hours, for example. So they were analyzing the game and all of them agreed that white, for example, had an advantage. So it was a clear advantage in the minds of all the masters there, right? And it's cool because like they write about that, and people like nowadays it will be blogs and commentaries and all. In the past it was like after tournaments there was books written with the commentaries and analysis and all. So Then Capablanca was passing by in the corridor, and of course, Capablanca, like the world champion at the time, they were like, hey, Capablanca, come here, give us your opinion. He comes into the room, he looks into the board for a few minutes, and then he says, black will win. There is nothing that white can do. And everybody was like, what? Like, you're crazy. We analyzed for hours. How come black will win? Like, it's clear advantage for white, and all this, like, mental fight started and all, right? And then he said, okay, look, he just put the pieces in another position, completely different than what the position that was in the board at the moment. And then he said, that's it. And then everybody looked into that position. It was, of course, in that position, black would win. But the matter is, there was nothing that white could do to avoid the game getting into that position. So look into how interesting it is. Like, instead of looking into like each moment of what was going on, he looked into, hey, what is the final achievement that he wanted? What is the position that was definitely winnable for him? And how he could avoid the others to have options to intercept getting into that position. So that's exactly what is a learning plan, right? You create your end goal. What is the final end result, or what's the final knowledge you want? And there is nothing someone can do to avoid you getting there. Nothing. Like, bosses can come with other topics for studying and all that might delay, but nothing can avoid you getting there, right? And if you really think about like a learning, right? We want again like use what Capablanca said. Many people, they look into the books and they think that the books will act to them like glasses. And actually the books needs to act to you like glasses. But remember, a glass will not make you see something, right? The glasses will actually increase your sighting. It will not give you sighting. If you give a glass to someone who is blind, nothing is gonna change. And a book is exactly the same thing in the opinion of Capablanca, not in mine, okay? And many years ago, like I said a phrase that's like, if you really know something, you can hack it. Because it makes sense. Once you really fully understand something, you will be able to modify it, to improve it, or to find security vulnerabilities in it if security is your area. But to hack is nothing related to only security. To hack is basically to evolve, to be able to adapt, to be able to modify to your needs. And once you really know, you can hack, definitely. Another point that I want to bring is that many times people say that sharing is caring, right? Like there is like this famous sentence, right? Or maybe not. Because the way that the world is now, it's not like we have a lack of information, right? Everybody's trying to share everything, like tweet is like crazy. Many times people say, hey, how do you follow like a tweet, right? And then software tries to evolve to increase our mechanisms for actually being able to observe all that. And then like more data starts coming, and then like we lost into that amount of data. But basically, I want to say that before sharing something you saw, right, did you actually read it? Because it's crazy, right? Sometimes I look into like people sharing stuff, and I'm like, wow, there is no way that guy is reading all that, commenting into all that other topics like unrelated to the area, and also working. So I don't know, I start thinking that those guys are basically social media professionals and nothing to do with security, right? And I do understand that, like, it's not because you're sharing, you're endorsing. And I share many things that I don't endorse, but that I think are interesting because bring interesting points of views or more things for discussing. So I would share things that I don't endorse, but I would never share something before reading it. Because in the end, it's your own reputation as well, right? What do you want? You want to be famous as a media guy, or you want to be famous or known because you share things that matter, right? Even if you don't agree with those things. So, and another thing is like, think about the people reading what you're sharing. If you think that sharing is caring, you're sharing because you're wanting to help. If you're honestly wanting to help, and you're sharing something, imagine that, for example, someone really follows you and reads everything you share. Are you really helping that person sharing things that you don't even know if make sense or not? So always think about that, because it's a big challenge, right? Like sometimes we look into something and we want to, hey, like look at what is going on. But at the least, understand before sharing, right? I think like that's actually an important recommendation. And that's basically the way that I do for organizing my social media experience. Is like, even though I follow a lot of people, I give colors for each. And I only read the ones that are marked in red. So people that share whatever, I might follow them, but I don't read anything that they actually sharing. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Like when you share something, why you're sharing it really, and know that. Another mistake that is very common, and that mistake came from misunderstanding of the open source community, is regarding the publish fast, right? People mistake with publish fast with publish whatever crap comes to your mind, right? I think like this, many times you do want to publish something that is unfinished because you want to create a discussion and you want feedbacks. And there is no problem on that if you make it very clear. The challenge here is like many times we have something that is unfinished research or something that, you know, like it's just a thought idea and we want to create like discussion around that idea, but we don't make it clear. And then some people that follow you guys and respect you will actually look into that and will basically think that's correct. And now you're teaching people the wrong things. And look, the open source community talks about like share fast, but they don't talk about like sharing any crap. It's usually like, hey, you have something that works, that's a good idea, that makes sense, it's a proposal for a change, then share, right? But discuss that. There is no problem on discussing. It's not like you need to share without discussing with anybody, without having peer review or anything, right? And it's funny, but in the community, it's very normal to ask peers to just go, hey, do you mind having a look? And you get a lot of great feedback on that. So many times I just get like a paper that I'm working on or an idea that I have, and I send to friends around, and Sergey is one of that gets more flooded by my emails. And basically then like I ask for an opinion. Hey, does that make sense? Does that connect or not? And there is no problem in doing it. And I think like we need to do even more. And I really recommend the entire community to do it. Another thing is like above like the velocity, right? Like because the world is changing, everything is much faster, and we have this new generations, which is funny because I am not that old, but there is a new generation coming, right? And that's like much younger than me. And I want to bring like another sentence from a chess. Actually, this is an international master. And basically he said, you know, like half of the variations in a tournament game are basically miscalculations, right? They are wrong. The only problem, we don't have a way to know in advance which half. So research, many times, is completely wrong, right? Many times you look into like, hey, how I exploit a given vulnerability. And after like a lot of time spent on it, sometimes months spent on it, you come to the conclusion that there is no way to exploit that vulnerability. Move on, right? It's normal. It's part of research. Research don't necessarily have good results. Research is open-ended many times. Many times you have an objective and you will go into the direction of that objective in the research, but there will be fails in the middle. But research takes time. So there is no way to basically have results without, I call, ass working time, which is really sit your ass in the chair and do the work, right? So it's important to remember that, because even though there is a new speed and people want like results and all the new generation wants to publish, there is no like a way to do it without the ass working time. And another thing that is interesting is because there is so many differences in culture in the world, right? And like American culture, like the culture in Europe, around Europe is also like many differences, Brazil and all these different countries, and everybody is interconnected, right? So it's very hard to basically work effectively and at the same time be professional and have the respect, right? So I'm sorry, but I think like the idea of like constructive criticism is kind of bull, right? I think people need to be honest. And in the communities, that's always been the case. Like when you go and you're contributing and you're talking about research, people will say, hey, that's bullshit, that sucks, like what a shit idea or whatever. And it's normal. It will always be normal, and people always wanted to criticize others. And there is no problem in going and basically proving the other guy is wrong with an exploit, for example, right, to his ideas. And it's funny because nowadays, with this whole like respect and all, people are like mixing what is basically respecting the person and basically have an open discussion. Like when you're discussing something, if you're discussing the idea itself, there is nothing personal there. You can say the idea is stupid, and you are not being unpolite with that person. You're not saying the person is stupid. It's that idea. The person can have all other ideas are brilliant. That one was stupid. It happens, right? And I think like it's important that we remember that because many people believe we need to transform the garbage in chocolate, right? And we need to basically be polite and all, but how we can do it and still be effective? So let's try to remove this politeness and keep the politeness to the person, but not necessarily to the ideas. Let people have fun, right? Because hacking is supposed to be cool. It's supposed to be fun. If hacking is not cool, if hacking is not fun, it's not hacking anymore, right? You might be paid and doing amazingly technical work and not be doing hacking if you're not thinking it's cool or you're not having fun. Okay, and that's an important distinction between what is being a hacker and what is being a security researcher, right? And remember always that. So there is no such thing as junk hacking, and I'm glad that Lafroig Pasteur actually agrees with me in the latest POC GTFO. I hope you guys read the sermon, but he definitely agrees that basically there is no such thing as junk hacking. If the guy's having fun, if the guy's sharing what he's doing, sharing some tricks, and he decided, in this case, even sharing with the huge community, how come it can be junk, right? It's increasing. It's like new ideas, new tricks. That's actually very nice. And remember, not because media is covering, it's actually important. So do anybody know about ROP talk? 1, 2 in the audience. 3. So basically, P-Patch, like the creator of PAX, in a conference, came and presented like a technique that really kills ROP. And he released the plugins for GCC as open source. So anybody could actually just go get the ideas. Like Microsoft could go there, look into implement the ideas in Visual Studio, instrument the system, instead of everybody trying to push the next version of whatever next product they have. Right? There are amazing work being done. There's a lot of new solutions available as open source, people working in really interesting problems with really good results and sharing to the community, and nobody is talking about that. So that's a big problem if you think, and if you ask me. Another point that I want to make, we always talk about trust, right? In our field, trust is something that we talk about. And it's interesting because in Troopers, there were in some instance, the trust workshop, right? By Pete, right? So, yeah. So the trust workshop, it was actually very interesting and very open-minded for me when I first attended it. Because basically then he came to the workshop and he said, hey, trust is given. Trust is not deserved. Right? And I was like, well, what he's talking about, right? The guy should deserve the trust. But we humans, we are naturally giving trust. And we don't really think much about that. But that's natural. That's embedded on us. It should not. We should analyze before giving the trust, right? We really should have a thought process. But that's not the way that we are basically made, right? Whoever believes in whatever, right? Or the way that we evolved. Somehow we evolved to trust others, right? And that there is a good reason for that. Otherwise, we would die in the woods, right, alone. But nowadays, maybe that trust is not necessary to be given anymore, right? Maybe we should guarantee people deserve. But that's interesting because that's why social engineering works. We all know that, right? But more than that, in security itself, that makes us look weird, right? Security guys are the paranoid guys, right? Because they don't want to give trust. They want the trust to be deserved. And actually, another day, 2 days ago, I had an amazing discussion in the company because I shared something with an individual in the company, and that person shared further with someone he trusted. And I told him, hey, I don't know the guy. And he's like, hey, but you know me, you trust me, and I trust the guy. And I was like, yeah, but not because I trust you and you trust him, I trust him, right? And I am the owner of that information. I didn't give you permission to go and share further, right? And it's interesting because it's normal. For me, it was like, well, I'm just making clear how trust works. And he works with security. I thought it was going to be so obvious. And for that person, it was not. He really believes trust is transitive. It's not supposed to be. So I think that's important that we remember that as security professionals, and we try to basically tell that to other professionals, trying to be polite, of course, but maybe I am not good in those kind of social skills. Another thing that I want to bring is the hacking scene dead or not? FX, actually in 2005, wrote a very interesting paper, The Extinction of Hackers. And in that paper, basically, he basically explained that hackers are disappearing, right? And if you think about, it's not that deep technical research is disappearing, it's hackers are disappearing, right? Part of the reason is the merging of communities. Part of the reason is really because there is so much money being paid now for doing deep technical research that many people are like basically forgetting about the community and just like thinking about all that money that you can make. And the matter is, if you look proportionally into the amount of people using technology and the amount of people that actually understand that technology, he has a point. But I think also the community is adapting. Right? The community still exists. It just exists in different forms. And I don't think hacking will ever be dead. I think there will be always hackers around changing the world and doing great work. It's just changing. But that paper actually completely changed my career at the time. And I was really in a cross point where I needed to decide, hey, do I want to basically evolve my career going towards more like management path? Or do I want to insist that the technical path has sense and will provide good results? I bet at the time that the technical side would provide good results, and I'm glad with that decision. And I must prize FX, one of the greatest hackers in the world, for that. So another one. And it's interesting, right? Because people ask if the scene is dead. So Mark Pasternak, another international master, said, oh, chess is not like life. Because chess has rules. And I would say that also CTFs, right? CTFs also has rules. And whoever knew what happened with the Brazilian army would understand that CTFs has rules. If you break the rules of the CTF, the community not necessarily will play by the rules in the world, right? So it was kind of interesting that someone accused them of breaking the rules in a CTF in Brazil, and they got hacked, basically, in the real world, right? And in that hack, they might not have broken the rules, by the way, but in that hack, the community said, hey, you guys went for the CTF and you broke one of the rules of the CTF, so then there is no rules. And they hacked in the army and they claimed that they put 10 backdoors in ARM systems and they gave one and told the army, okay, now you have 1 year to find the others. So, it's interesting because you guys remember that that saying, right? That basically was by half of the calculations are wrong, we just don't know which half. So this is the connection to that sale. So Tartakover, another grandmaster, also say that some part of a mistake is always correct, right? That's the interesting saying. But if you connect it to Steinitz, another grandmaster, that said an accumulation of small advantages leads to a supreme advantage, we can understand that if you keep making the mistakes and you get like all these small advantages, right? Because they are somehow correct in a part because you learned something, and you collect that, you will end up with a supreme advantage. So the truth is, if you really keep the path, if you really study, if you really dedicate, even when you make like mistakes, even when you start like you learning and not working, in the end, that collection of multiple advantages, there is no way it will not generate a supreme advantage, which means a good result, whatever is a good result for you. Some people would believe it's like growing in the career. Some others will think like whatever, like having cool lifestyle. Some others will think like go living in the woods. Whatever is good, like having more friends, whatever. But the matter is, if you're really dedicating, there is no way that's going to be the end result. And hackers are changing the world, right? If we look into like big corporations, we have hackers working there. And it's interesting because I want to prize them as well, right? You see like technologies coming out of Oracle, for example, that would never have been possible if it was not for a great hacker that works in Oracle Solaris team. You see like technologies coming out of like different corporations like Microsoft, which hired like a lot of hackers and are really changing the way that the company basically does security. And also you see lots of independent hackers that were completely independent of those big corporations and also succeeding, right? Look into the evolutions of PAX and GR security, which is basically independent guys doing the research. So those guys, they really need to be praised. And they basically work on pushing defensive techniques that really work, right? That are out of this like security life cycle that like keeps going, right? Which is very convenient for companies selling solutions, but not necessarily good for everyone who needs something secure. And also, like I want to prize the guys that work finding vulnerabilities. Look into, for example, Google Project Zero, right? It's a bunch of hackers working for big corporations, and they release and find vulnerabilities all the time. They're killing lots of bugs. They work not only finding the issues, but they also work like incrementing the mechanism for avoiding those issues to be exploitable in the future. So a researcher from Google Project Zero, actually a female research, was responsible for like 60% of the Adobe bugs in the past year. That's a lot, right? And that tells a lot to us, right? The first thing it tells us is like in this audience, we need to have more women because they are super smart and super capable, right? And the second thing is like even like guys working for the big corporations can be doing interesting work, right? So I think that's also a change in the world, right? Because in the past that would never be possible. Who here remembers the time when you reported a vulnerability to Microsoft and they actually threatened you with a lawsuit? I needed to explain them multiple times that Brazil is in Brazil, not in US, right? So they didn't know. So another like connection that I want to make is between art and exploiting. It's interesting because Botivnik, as you guys notice, I'm a fan, right? He once said that chess is the art that expresses the science of logic. I would say that actually exploitation is actually the art that expresses the science of logic, right? I really like to connect that because I really believe that's true. But mostly important, if exploiting something is art, we do have poetic license. So I'm sorry if I don't know your CISSP terminology, but I am exploiting your software nonetheless, right? And it was funny because in Philip's talk yesterday, he mentioned that, yeah, you know, like I didn't prove in the paper that I broke your software, right? But here it goes, I broke it, right? And nonetheless, it's a proof. And I thought it was excellent, so praise to him as well. Thank you for the great talk. So offensive and defensive research are important, right? And I think like we cannot ignore any of them. It's common that like people see offensive research as more interesting, right? They get the news. People go to like big conference to talk about like the latest car hacking or whatever hacking they did, right? That's not junk hacking. And it's important, but it's not the only thing that is important. Defensive research is also important because without that kind of defensive research, we will never manage actually to have secure systems, right? Because we know that in the engineering process, there will be always bugs, right? And that's actually a very famous sentence, there will be always bugs. And that sentence is actually by Linus Torvalds. And he basically claimed that like security bugs should not be seen as more important than other bugs. Because for him, engineering process is the process of trying to catch those bugs, fix them, and evolve. Those bugs need to be treated as normal bugs. He's completely wrong, of course. But the matter is like, we need to work on the mitigations. And he refuses to work on mitigations, basically because he believes it's part of the engineering problems. There will always be bugs. And the idea of those mitigations is exactly the opposite. The idea is to say, even though there will be bugs, they will not be exploitable. I don't know if many people here ever met Spender. He's like a great guy, great researcher behind GR security. And one of the very first conversations I had with him, He's not known to be very nice online. He's a great guy in person, but online he's not like very known for being nice. The very first things he told me after he said that no Brazilians know how to do security research was basically that, because when he told that to me, I was like, okay, no Brazilians know how to do security research. I was like thinking about the number of Brazilians, poor guys, I infected the entire population, right? And then I was like, okay, but think about, like one day, one of your systems will be vulnerable. And one of those Brazilian guys might be watching, right, for that day to happen, right? And Brazilians are known for being patient, like the Chinese, right? And then he was like, yes, my systems might have a vulnerability, but there is no one in Earth that is capable of exploiting them. It's like very arrogant, but it was quite interesting, right? Because that's really the mentality behind GRSec and many of those defensive projects. It's like, hey, it's not like they want to kill the vulnerabilities. They want to kill the capabilities for exploiting them. And it's interesting because they're demonstrating this is real, this is practical. The performance impacts are completely acceptable, less than 5%, for example. Definitely much better than NAV, right? So I think that that's another work that must be praised. And I will praise them again, right? So GR Security, PACS, they are years ahead of the defensive research that you see outside of the community. That's open source projects. If you guys didn't hear about it, I really suggest that you go and read it. And to be honest, the advances that they created are actually changing and affecting other systems already, right? Address space layout randomization, for example, came from this open source project, work by hackers, independent hackers, not connected to anybody, that just like release things to the community. And next bit in the hardware basically is based on the idea that they implemented that without the hardware support and many other things that came from them. So if you don't know about it, like you should, because there is no way you can be doing security without actually understanding what these guys are doing. And basically, when we talk about like open source versus hacking and Linus versus researchers, right? Just because I mentioned Linus, Linus Torvalds is a brilliant engineering, right? Like a brilliant engineer. He's really good, and he's actually really good actually making people do the work, right? And he many times are like shouting on them, and I think it's totally fine. It's just his style, right? But the problem is not really doing like Linus Torvalds per se, but the whole understanding that many people believe that offensive is cool, defensive is boring, right? It is not. And many guys working on real defensive solutions really understand like how exploits work, how exploits are written, and are really trying to do cool stuff on that. But most important than that, think about the creativity process, right? And again, I will bring like Botivnik to help us here, but basically he said that chess, like any, and I like because he said like any creative activity can exist only through the combined efforts, right? The combined efforts of who has the creative talent and those who have the ability to organize the work. So Linus Torvalds has the ability to organize the work. He just needs now to start to listen to the creative people. And then Linux will be a system that will be really secure instead of being like what it is, right? And it's funny because there is a saying about like psychologically brutal. I thought it was like really interesting, like psychologically brutal. And Kasparov actually said there are few things that are psychologically brutal as chess. And that's because he never contributed to the Linux kernel, right? He definitely never did. So what can we improve, right? And that's like the part where researchers are completely culpable. They're like every time like we demonstrate a bypass in a given technology, it's interesting because like we are so happy that show, hey, look, I hacked into this. Doesn't matter what is this, right? It can be Windows, Linux, Mac, a car, whatever. Every time we go and say, hey, I hacked into this, or hey, I bypassed the latest version of whatever defense mechanism, we forgot to mention, okay, how many other cases that defensive mechanism actually worked, right? Yeah, you bypassed the Chrome sandbox. How many times the Chrome sandbox actually worked? Oh, you bypassed, I don't know, address space layout randomization on Windows. How many other vulnerabilities you couldn't exploit because of that, right? That's the first thing we forget. But the most important thing we forget, and many times the researchers even say, yeah, you know, sometimes it works, but there is an implementation problem. But okay, the next thing that they're forgetting is like, what is the state of the art of that defense mechanism, right? Because Windows as the address space layout randomization is not the state of the art of address space layout randomization implementation. So many of the mechanisms, they are implemented, but they have like tweaks for working or for giving a little bit more performance, or because like there is some legacy support that needs to exist. But what is the real state of the art? The real state of the art on mitigation techniques really works. The huge majority of vulnerabilities would not be exploitable if we had the state of the art in our systems. So remember that, because maybe instead of trying to create new technologies and new blah, 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 and new blah, 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 we should also work on, hey, let's use the state of the art before even thinking about new whatever, right? And that's actually one really, really big challenge to all of you that do security or do security research or are in the hacking community. How do we make people aware of the state of the art? Right? What really exists and is practical. It's proven to be practical, but nobody's really necessarily using. And that's I like the sentence by Fisher, like an American chess player, and he's very American by his comment, right? I like the moment when I break someone's ego, right? And that's really breaking the ego of the researchers, right? Because whatever we did, whatever bypass, brilliant idea, whatever, it doesn't lose credit or doesn't lose importance just because we mentioned if people were in the state of the art, that was not going to be possible. We should be doing that. And we actually should be ashamed of not doing that if we are not doing it. So what the future really holds for us? Well, nobody can really foresee the future, right? But I have like some points that I want to make clear that are my views of like what is really challenging there. So complexity is really bad. You know, like many times in Intel, like when someone comes with a new proposal of a new security enhancement or new security something, I challenge the guy to, okay, now can you do the same, removing something? It's interesting, right? Because the guy goes and, hey, there is this new great idea. I connect this other bus, this other element, this microcode change, and I was like, okay, now how you do similar results, but you need to remove something as well, right? If you're proposing to add, why are you also not proposing to remove, right, the complexity? And it's interesting because the huge majority of things can be simplified if people really give the value to the simplification, right? Another thing that past year's talk, like I gave with Gabriel, we mentioned it many times, is like assumptions are very dangerous, right? And that's actually based on, on this fact that people don't really go and check facts or study and really go and try to understand things. They just make assumptions. And the matter is, because we have so much complexity, there is so many layers between what is really going on in the computer and what the developer believes is going on in the computer. So many layers of abstraction in the middle that it's very hard to expect secure results from that. So assumptions are really dangerous. The other thing, and actually that actually connects to a Sergey talk that he gave to us at Intel, about like the composition of systems, right? You know, like you can have multiple elements that are very secure, but not necessarily when you compose them, they will be as secure as each element. And it's interesting because people talk about the chain, right? And this idea of like, hey, security is like a chain and it is as strong as the weakest point. In the composition, the chain factor is not real. So the composite system might be more insecure than the most insecure item in that composition. Remember that, because there is new things that arise from that composition. And that's actually a big mistake that people make, is to think that when they're composing, they will be as secure as the weakest link there in that composition. That's not true. And the other thing is, like, remember, what is formally proven is not necessarily real, okay? It might be formally proven, but proven in which conditions, right? Be very careful with this idea that, hey, it's proven to be secure. Okay, very careful, because even if that's the case in the higher layers, maybe that's not the case in the lower layers. Even if the proof was really like completely correct proof with all the quesits of the system, because there's lots of things that you will not model in that proof. So be careful. I'm not saying don't go for that approach. I'm just saying be careful with the approach. So I want to give like 3 items for anyone to remember, right? And hopefully everybody enjoyed that. But first item is care about what you do more than what the others do, unless they're damaging someone, right? If they are not doing something bad to the others, whoever, they can do whatever junk hacking they're doing. That there is no point. But remember, researchers should have fun and they should enjoy it. So why not? Why actually care? Treat the information you receive as data. Process it, get your own conclusions. Remember, you need to process as deep as the importance of that information to whatever you're doing, right? So be careful. And disseminating information is really different than disseminating garbage, right? Do you really read and know about what you're disseminating, or you're just basically moving forward, right? We keep getting news from 20 years ago now, right? Because people believe they are new, and they go and they reshare that news information. So remember that and be careful. So thank you very much.